by way of a quick introduction, we have Andrey Smelter. As he said, he is a researcher and software developer at the University of Kentucky in the Markey Cancer Center. And then we have Luther Hill, a data scientist with the U.S. Army in the medical department. Then we have Nate Harmon. He calls himself the chief executive grunt at level 12. So he's a man who wears a whole lot of hats, including a software developer and just about everything else. And then Nathan Allen down here at the end, you see him, he's probably one of our most faithful attenders here at DerbyPy, I'd say. So he does tech support at Magna Carta Cable. So thank you all for being a part of our DerbyPy event tonight. So the first question that I have, for which of you was this your first PyCon? I know it was my first PyCon.
Yeah, it's definitely mine.
So why don't you guys tell us what inspired you to go to PyCon in the first place? Some of these, maybe some of the people here haven't been before. So what inspired you to say, this is where I need to go? Nathan?
Okay. So I mentioned that I'm getting back into coding after a 20-year hiatus. So I wanted to go and sort of see if I understood anything, meet people and see what they're doing in the industry. What direction do I need to point my efforts into studying rather than, taking a chance and maybe learning the wrong stuff and then needing to start back from the beginning. But it was well worth it.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest thing was some of the presentations where it looked like really interesting. And then just a chance to network with other professionals. Sometimes it's hard to meet people who do what you do, but out there it seemed like a lot of people had had similar job roles. So it was a great chance to kind of share that knowledge.
And then Nate and Andre, you've been to a couple, it seems. So why go back? What keeps you going there year after year?
Well, so this was just my second year. I've been to a handful of different regional Python conferences. I've gone to Pi Ohio a couple times and Pi Tennessee. And so just going to PyCon, it's just great opportunity to see sort of one of the neatest things there is you often have some of the core developers there, like Guido is there and a lot of the core developers. And one of the last main talks they had was kind of, you get sort of the inside scoop on what's going on in Python. So it's just, for me, being involved with a company where Python is the primary language we use, it's just really helpful to be able to see what's going on in the larger community and be aware of things that otherwise I wouldn't be aware of, I think.
And Andre, I imagine that you did quite a bit of networking while you're there, right?
Yeah, I did so. Yeah, so this is my second PyCon as well. So I've been to the last year in Cleveland. But it's just a nice place to be, at the PyCon, for the be there for the community, talk to all the folks, and learn about all of the different technologies. Do the sprints, do the the volunteering job, volunteering, and just like a geek holiday, just for a week, go there and forget about work and do some other stuff interesting and talk to people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny that you said it was a geek holiday. It actually fell on May the 4th this year, so I was expecting a whole lot of Star Wars stuff, but I was a little disappointed. I felt like I was the only person there with a Star Wars shirt on. So
I think you were.
I think I was. All the rest of you guys are Trekkies, I guess. So what did you think was the best talk at PyCon and why? Why don't we start with Andre?
So I've got a couple. So I think I really like the keynote by Russell McGee about Python on different platforms and the future of Python. So yeah, so this is an example of how to basically do a great keynote plus raise very important problems about the Python. So he was talking about this black swan events where Python is basically getting left out of the mobile platforms, only runs on server side. So he was talking about the burnout in general open source community, and a couple of other, like how to fund the open source projects. He was raising those issues and something else. So that was a very good keynote, I think. And the other one that I liked was about the Raymond Hettinger talk that we will be talking later.
Yeah.
So.
Cool.
I think for me, the favorite talk was also Andrew, the presentation talked about the future of Python, where he addressed that definitely Python is getting left out of the mobile space. My kids are on, I don't think they even know what a laptop looks like anymore. They're on the iPads, they're on my phone, they're on their Game Boys. And then to think that Python doesn't have a presence in that kind of space when it's clearly the future is definitely something to keep an eye on, because that's, if you don't want to end up like Fortran or something where it's great for that one specific environment, but we've moved past that, and you don't want Python to be left out of that where technology is going.
So I enjoyed that talk as well, but I'll give you guys another one. So one of the workshops that I went to was on a library called Dataset. It's put together by a guy who, his name's Simon Willison, I believe. He is a journalist who has sort of turned data scientist. And what he's done is basically provided a library that allows you to take data and put it into a SQLite database and throw it into an API that then you can display on a web browser for anybody. I think you can even write raw SQL in it to query some stuff. And I think he ties that in with, forget the name of the glitch.com. I'm not too familiar with Glitch, but I guess that allows you to then host it publicly. You don't have to have any kind of authentication, and then you can just provide. So it's really useful for journalists or people interested in large amounts of data and being able to publish it out there for anybody to access and query. So it's just a really nice tool for that. I was really interested in that.
I enjoyed, there were several talks talking about the intersection of technology and the human experience. We tend to have this idea that if we can feed a computer information, the result we get out is clearly unbiased. It came from a computer based on math. But there were several people discussing the fact that we have at times encoded our own biases into the algorithms, and seeing people discuss that and talking about how we can go around that. And there were two talks on that in and of itself. And then there was a keynote talking about people using community programs to learn to code to raise themselves up into a better societal position, which was extremely exciting. And those were my favorite parts of it.
So I like that you talked on that. I felt like one of the great moments at PyCon was actually Shaw Wallace Stepter's talk. And if you haven't watched that video, it's a really intriguing video. He's a gentleman who had been in prison actually for a while, and he figured out that the way to kind of transcend his bounds was to start coding and learning Python. And once he was able to get out of prison, he was able to find a developer job. And I thought that was just really incredible that he was able to get that sort of career while he was in prison. And it was amazing to see the Python community supporting him, because that's one of the things that I hear. I'm kind of new in the Python community. That's why I hear all the time is, man, the Python community is so open and accepting. And then to actually see that and see, I guess, the versatility of the Python community to allow somebody like that to come in and have a meaningful career. So I wanted to bring that up and see how that struck you guys. I don't know if were all of you at that talk?
caught it online afterwards, but I agree with him. Even from my experience there going to Python, the community is very inclusive. I've been to a few of the tech conferences, and it tends to be kind of monochromatic or something, but the Python conference was very inclusive. Everybody was super helpful. Everybody was willing to share information. Everybody had a positive outlook on something. You know, I always reference Fortran something because I feel like you go to that kind of conference and everybody's looking at you like you're going to steal their job or, you know, or something. So it was great to see that it was a growing field. It was inclusive. And it was just a fun environment, definitely. And that's the great thing about Python, because it's used in so many different applications, you really get a chance to explore. And I think that's good for everybody.
Yeah, I definitely felt kind of overwhelmed by the amount of possibilities of things that you could dive into at Python.
Yeah, definitely.
So did anybody else?
Yeah, I was encouraged by that talk as well. I think it's a inspiring story just to see sort of his journey and now his goal to encourage others and help others be able to get a career, you know, after being in prison. And so I think, you know, as somebody who's an employer, we do run background checks, and that's one of those things obviously you have to think about at times when you're hiring, but being able to think about those things in a way that is beneficial to recognize that there is a road to redemption for people, and being able to allow for that road to redemption and allow people to be able to grow and expand and be able to come out of a situation where he recognized he made a mistake, and now he's trying to, you know, he paid his time for that. And now he's trying to make a better life, and having that opportunity and seeing Python as the means of that opportunity is just an encouraging thing to see that he was able to do that. And so, yeah, it was good.
Yeah. So just a slight correction. So I don't think that talk, the keynote the recording of that was lost.
Oh, really?
And it's not available online, but there is a recording from the last year. It was not a keynote, but from the similar. So the guy was from the similar program out of prison. So he learned to program Python during his term, and then after he got out, so he got a job at the Fundome, the wiki website about the Python-based, right? If anybody watched that one. But yeah, so if you missed that one, so you either can search for the Twitter feed. There were several folks tweeting like the quotes and you know, the main points of the presentation, or maybe watch that other talk from the last year.
Yeah. I think it amazes me that, you know, really you can come from, you know, any number of backgrounds into the software industry and into Python and learn and, you know, kind of grow at your own pace. And, you know, Nathan, you said that you're kind of jumping back in after a several year hiatus from programming. I think that's just so cool. You know, I don't feel like there's a whole lot of industries that are like that, where you can just jump into the deep end after being away or coming from a different background and really jump into the deep end again.
Yeah, especially without having to without having to go back to school and get another degree and all the student debt that comes with it nowadays.
Yeah.
I mean, here in Jefferson County, of course, we have access to Treehouse and lynda.com that has really great learning tools. So,
yeah. Well, Andrey, you mentioned watching Raymond Hedinger's Modern Solvers, Problems Well Defined or Problems Well Solved. Did anybody else manage to make it to that talk or watch it online? So I'd love to hear what you guys thought of that. When I was doing some prep work for this, DerbyPy, I actually saw that it was the most watched talk from the conference. So I'm like, oh, we got to talk about this. This was popular. So what are the highlights of that? Why is that the most watched talk from PyCon 2019?
So I guess, I think his talks are consistently the most watched talks throughout the different years, I think. And the reason is that he explains a very big ideas, as he say, like you can explain a very big idea with a very little Python code. And you know, I think that was the main point for that presentation. And it just basically, and also the generic solution to a problem, like those puzzle solvers that he was talking about, is superior to the custom solutions. And like in terms of scalability and you know, they outperform the custom solutions. And as he said, like the problem well defined, the part of the solution to the problem is how you correctly define your problem, and you can get halfway through the solution already. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I had never kind of encountered any of his talks before until I watched it online. And one thing I really found interesting was, like I said, to clearly define your problem. In my line of work with data science, you know, a lot of people tend to get wrapped up into algorithms and the processing speed and efficiency. But I think a lot of times we don't take care to actually look at our data and think to ourselves, like, what question am I really asking? You talked about the bias earlier, and when I saw that presentation online, I think, and he had a great picture in there where he had the picture of, I think it was like a cockatoo, or it was some kind of bird that he was some kind of picture he had in there. And then, so basically the machine model had been trained not to recognize the cockatoo, but the green background. Because on all the data, on all the pictures that were fed into the model, cockatoos were found in tropical green environments. So it didn't have to recognize the actual bird. It had to just recognize the green background. So if you place a cockatoo in front of a red background, it wouldn't recognize it because it didn't know. So for me, I think it really showed me that you really have to think about, what problem am I really trying to solve for? What am I really asking this data or this algorithm, versus just kind of, you know, you get that requirement, it's super generic, and you're like, well, let's just see what happens. You know, really kind of think through it and make sure you have a solid question. So it was very interesting.
Well, I only caught a very little part of that talk. I was listening to it in my car on the way to work this morning. I just plugged it into my little audio jack. You know, one of the things that stood out to me was he was talking about how, you know, these programs, you know, amplify humanity in a way
Star
that
Trek.
we haven't. Yeah, exactly. Start out with Star Trek, not Star Wars. Yeah. So he started out with the Star Trek reference that it's amplifying humanity in really ways that we haven't been able to do before, and I thought that was a really cool way of thinking about, you know, programming and the problem solvers that are used.
Yeah. It's like when we had all this, you know, the neural networks and all of those algorithms like 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But that's how they now put the things together so that they work, and we've been able to do new or more exciting things right now with them. Yeah.
So Nate, I know that you and I went to a talk called Wiley Python, Writing Simpler and More Maintainable Python. And I remember that kind of sticking out to both of us. So do you want to talk at all about the tools that were used? You know, that's a tool for measuring code quality and tracking quality over revisions. Do you want to say anything about that, and maybe how?
Yeah, I'm just going to try to remember the details of that one. So the key things I think that stood out to that for me were just some of the challenge. I think at times I was thinking about it in terms of business and dealing with business users at times who have a difficult, you have managers at times who have a difficult time understanding, like, how do I quantify, you know, productivity in code and how it's done, and sort of the code maintenance that needs to be done over the lifetime of things. And so oftentimes you get to, like, well, let's count the lines of code, and that, you know, if you do lots of lines of code, somehow that's productive. But anybody who's in software development knows that that's a bad way to do it. And so the things that stood out to me were he just had some Python packages that were allowed that took some different algorithms to basically, you could run them over your Python code and try to determine what the level of complexity is. And, you know, try to determine what level of technical debt you're sort of gaining as your application grows, as you introduce new functions and things like that. So it appeared that it could be something you could use sort of in your pull request reviews to try to look over your code and give at least indicators of, are there potentially better ways that you could be writing this? Is this maybe a poorly written function because of various factors? And so I don't know. I am not a senior engineer, and so I did have one of the guys on our team look it over, and he wasn't sure that it would be something we'd be able to implement in what we're doing. But that, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not a useful project. But it was intriguing to me in that way.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool that it could track the progress, over revisions, so that you could say, okay, we did all this work and we made it X amount more efficient. Or you can say, oh, we did this amount of work and it wasn't as good as it used to be, right? Did any of you other guys go to that talk as well?
Yeah, I went to that.
Yeah.
So the tool is called, you can check it out. The tool is called Wiley, and the talk is by Anthony Shaw. And so, yeah, so this is a really interesting idea and how you measure that, all of the characteristics of your code. And just wanted to point out, I just remembered in my mind the slide that he put, take your code, put it upside down, and draw the graph, and then you see the complexity of your code, and the flat is better than nested, and you can see all of those features. Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah.
I think I did write down, if you're interested, I think if you go to realpython.com/python-refactoring, he's got a blog post where he sort of talks through some of the stuff that he went through in the talk that he mentioned. So.
Cool. So one of the major events that happened in Python history, recent Python history, was that Guido stepped down from being the BDFL, right, the beneficial dictator for life, and decided to form the Python Steering Council, which is consistent of Guido, Barry Warsaw, who's a senior software engineer at LinkedIn and a lead maintainer of Jython. Brett Cannon, the principal software engineer at engineering manager at Python and Python core developer. And then Carl Willing of the research software engineer for Project Jupiter, also a core developer, and Nick Coughlin, CPython core developer. So that was kind of a big shift in Python in recent history. And I just wonder, what you guys think about the significance of that. What is the significance of this new era of Python, and what possibilities are in front of the community?
Well, so I'll say two things. So there was one talk on the walrus operator. I forget the name of the gentleman who did the talk, but the walrus operator was essentially the PEP. And those of you who don't know, a PEP is, I forget what it stands for.
Python Enhancement Proposal. Python
Enhancement Proposal, and that's basically the means that they use in Python to determine, is this something that we want to implement into the language? And so historically, Guido was sort of the one at the top who would make the final decision, or I think he did some delegation along those lines. But when the walrus operator was proposed, and I forget which PEP that was.
527.
527. There was basically a lot of discussion around that. And one of the things that basically happened was, I think some of that discussion got pretty rude, unkind, demeaning. And so one of the things that came up in this year and last year, you mentioned Brett Cannon. I think you said he works for Microsoft, but he's one of the guys that's now part of this steering committee. He did a talk at last year's PyCon that talked about burnout and talked about sort of some of the struggles with open source development. And I think this is a problem that's sort of in the larger not just in the open source community, but in sort of the way we tend to treat people online when we're sort of behind our computers. There's a tendency now to be able to hide behind your computer and say things that are just unkind to people. And what's happened is people who are investing their time for free, their energy, their efforts to better, help people like us who are using Python are now getting burnt out or getting hurt. And they're saying, I don't really want to do this anymore if it's going to be this much of a challenge for me to work with individuals. And so I think the thing that came out of this for me is just remembering sort of how do we treat people, and Brett Cannonstock, I'd encourage you to go back to that from last year. He sort of laid out some examples for how you would go about working on an open source project. What are sort of some of the ways you could treat maintainers and the way you could communicate to them? So I think the direction it's heading is, even though it sort of came to a head and there was some turmoil around it, I think by and large, it kind of, it forced something that probably needed to happen, which was for the longevity of Python. You don't want to have somebody who, long-term is always going to be there. So being able to allow him to begin delegating some of those responsibilities to others, now having a committee and be able to sort of pass the baton on to others, I think is a good thing overall for Python. And Guido's still part of that. And I think it's going to be helpful for him long-term. It was interesting. The example he used when he was talking about it was he's got kids that are now moving on to college. And so, I think everybody knows Guido was the guy who invented Python, right? And so he's the one who's the main guy responsible for the past 20 plus years. So, but the example of now your kid's going off to college, and now you have to sort of, trust them to go on and move forward. And so there's some sort of worry about that, but there's also sort of a entrusting to growth and development. And so that was sort of the analogy that I think he used, which I think was helpful. So I'm sure he still cares deeply about Python as the language, but he's now able to step back a little bit and allow others to help keep it moving forward.
Yep. From my perspective, I thought it was a transition point. It's funny that you talked about the open source, because I read an article today where it talked about scientific. I don't know. I like the Linux. I like Linux platform. I kind of follow the whole open source Linux movement. And one of the things that came up was Scientific Linux actually closed down shop. Arch Linux, I think, also closed down shop. And then Linux Mint is having internal strife about how to do things, and that might be coming to a close. So I think it's similar for Python, where it's entered the stage of adulthood, where it's no longer a niche tool. It's no longer something that the cool kids do, and like everybody, all the hipsters are doing. I mean, you can look around the room and you see Python being used in all different types of organizations, from independent people to big business. So I think it's more about him recognizing the transition that, hey, this is an actual thing now. It's no longer a pet project that I use. It's an actual thing. There needs to be continuity. And also from the talk earlier, when they mentioned that Python's not in the mobile space, I think that's something the steering committee is definitely going to have to address, because it's no longer just about technical ability. It's also about the bigger vision for the language itself. Like, where is this going to be in 10 years from now? Is it going to be Fortran, or is it going to continue as a viable language for everyone? So I look at it as like more him recognizing that transition. Like, it has to grow up.
Yeah, I guess it's basically just to repeat what Nate said. So it's basically how Python community is able to came out strong in times of uncertainty. Like then when there was an uncertainty between like Python 2 and Python 3, which one is going to win, like back in 2010, 11, 12, 13, like they started working on the new features available on the Python 3 and show people like, this is the future, this is the what you should invest your time. This is the new feature that you have to use. And in here is like the walrus separator debate. So he basically got to the point where the BDFL, he just basically dropped the mic and said to the community, go ahead and figure out what you want to do. And they were able to, pick up the mic and come out strong and better for the community and for the language.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I was thinking one more thing that stood out to me. One of the women on the committee, I forget her name, but she's part of the Jupiter.
Carol Willing.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because one of the things you're seeing is Python expanding, and one of the ways it's expanded significantly just over the past few years is in that data science community. So I think it's encouraging to know that you have somebody on the committee that really cares and sees the value of where Python is heading in that direction.
Yeah, and it is according to the latest survey, it's 50-50, right? Yeah.
Between Python and R?
No, between Python for like web development and Python for the data science.
Well, one of the other questions I have down here, did anybody make it to the Pinterest talk, Python 2 to 3?
Actually, watched it online.
Watched it online?
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on that? That was kind of interesting in that they were kind of a test company, right, of how to transition from Python 2 to Python 3. So what were your thoughts on that talk?
So I watched the similar talks on the previous PyCon. I think it was very similar in terms of that. So there was a talk about like how the Facebook started implement like adding the Python 3 environments and just we just add the Python 3 and then see what happens. If people will complain. And then there was like an Instagram talk, also one of the previous years, and how they migrated from Python 2 to Python 3. And this talk is just basically, you start simple, you add, the key points is that you make your Python 3 environment available for your, on your development systems. Then you make sure that you have all the unit tests that you have to have and make things work on both on Python 2 and Python 3. And then make all the tests pass, and then after you basically finished with that, you can remove the older pieces of Python 2 and then start implementing new features in Python 3. Like that's what was general outline for me and how people in the industry do that transition from 2 to 3. And they had like this the development principle, start simple, build for impact, and own the project. Yeah.
Well, I didn't go to that talk, but I was just thinking that so I think it's pretty common over the past several PyCons to have a Python 2 to 3 talk because Python 2 is end of life at the end of this year. And so that's just a reminder for anybody who's still using Python 2 to start moving to Python 3. I'll try to remember next time I'm here. I didn't grab a lot of them, but there's the group that sponsors the DerbyPy meetup. They're called 6 Feet Up, and they had some really cool stickers this year. That was a picture of a Python with a gravestone next to it, and it said, it had Python 2.7 next to it or whatever I think it was. So just kind of funny to think about. So yeah, just remembering that this will likely maybe be the last year that you have a Python 2 to 3 talk, right?
Yeah. It'll live on forever in Stack Overflow. I'm still finding all the time. Yeah.
I didn't read it, but the guys at work had posted something about Python 4 on our channel today. So hopefully you won't have the same types of challenges when you go to Python 4 that you did from Python 2 to 3. So.
Very good. Well, I kind of wanted to kind of end our talk this evening with just asking you guys, what were some of your biggest takeaways from the conference? What were some key things that you learned and look into the future, you say, man, I'm going to implement that. That really had a great impact on me.
I'll go first. I think for me, it was simplify the solution. A lot of times, I think in my line of work anyway, it's easy to get wrapped up about the algorithm. It's easy to try to outsmart somebody else, prove your statistical knowledge and try to, I was at this great talk by Capital One, and one of the questions there was, the woman giving the presentation was saying, okay, we have a 92% confidence level and, we kind of rolled with it. And then somebody there mentioned, well, why don't you go for 95? So it's just that kind of like 92 in this business case works perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It works good. Project, let's move on. So just a reminder to me, the biggest thing I got away was that keep the solution simple, make sure it's understandable, and don't try to outsmart somebody and come up with this is, so much better, but is it easier for the developer to understand? Can you make the business case for it? Can you explain it to your executives versus it's the latest and greatest thing that I could be doing right now? So that was a big takeaway for me. Try to just simplify the solution, make sure it works before I worry about, is it the latest and greatest thing I could be doing?
Well, for me, I took just a sense of affirmation. Like I said, I'm getting back into things. Wasn't really sure I was going to understand much of what I was hearing. But every evening I was on the phone with my wife saying, I got to tell you about what I talked to this new person and that I met at lunch about. And I wound up bringing home just tons of projects that I've been working on since then. So for me, it was just a reminder that, okay, I was in the right place.
Yeah.
I'm learning the right stuff and excited about the future.
And did you stick around for any of the sprints where you're working on?
I wanted to, but didn't have the time off.
Okay.
I'd say I'll give you two takeaways. One will be very practical. The other is more of a broader takeaway. And I'd say the broader takeaway was sort of just remembering sort of that we stand on the shoulders of giants. And so being around a lot of the people there and just seeing the PyCon just is always a good reminder of how much Python is used, how many people are using it, and how many people have put a lot of time and effort and energy to making a great tool that many of us use and rely on for our livelihoods. And so just remembering and appreciating all that's come before us and the value that brings to our lives is just really an encouragement. So that's sort of the broader takeaway. The sort of immediate takeaway, I went to a talk, was dealing with sort of security stuff in Python, and mentioned a library called Bandit, which is now owned by the Python Code Quality Authority, which I believe are the same ones who use Flake 8, maintain Flake 8. But it's basically a check that you can put into your code that will then go out there. There's a paid version. There's a database, basically. I forget who it is that puts together this database. But you can go out there and basically look for known vulnerabilities in any libraries that you're using. If you just use the open source one, that database is updated once a month. If you, I forget the name of it's pyup.io, I think it is. If you subscribe to that, you can get daily updates for that. But just a good check that you can put into your Python code to ensure, hey, none of the libraries I'm using have known vulnerabilities, and keeping stuff up to date. So.
Yeah, and then dependencies as well.
Yes.
Yeah, it does check that.
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
The whole chain.
Yeah, and for me, I guess it's just so how great and welcoming the Python community is, and how much stuff is there to do. It's a kids friendly. So if you have kids, you can they have a daycare. You can bring your kids. So they have this young coder stuff. Yeah. So you can sign up your kid for the young coders, and lots of great, like there's an educational summit, lots of different things to do. Another takeaway is just how how little code is necessary to express the big ideas.
Keep
Yeah.
it simple.
Yeah, keep it simple.
Very good. Well, thank you guys for taking the time to speak tonight. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
What's the walrus operator do?
So the walrus operator is basically, it allows you to do the assignment, the same like assignment within, for example, you have the if statement, you do if a colon equal to this. So previously you have to define the a variable above and do the assignment and then use it. So you can directly assign within your expression that you are working with. Like you can do it within the generator or list comprehension or generator expressions or within the if statements or within the for loops. Yeah, so it's PEP 5.2.27, just Google PEP 5.2.27.
Yeah, and there was a talk that was directly on that. And I mean, I'm not a senior engineer. I don't know what the big debate was about, to be honest, but it strikes me as a really useful operator as I look at it. So.
Can it only be used in statements and generators, or can it just be used like?
I think so.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Alex, you seem to know about
So
it.
I guess the big debate was that the Python core developers, some of them like saying that we don't need that extra stuff in there. It just makes the core code harder to read, and that's why they were against that. But once you kind of absorb it and look into that at more detail, this is turns out kind of useful and nice to have. You don't have to use it, but yeah.
Any other questions? Go for it.
So during the keynote, you had said the keynote was about sort of like the future of Python and hardware it would expand into. Is that right?
So
what sort of hardware were they talking about, or like what platforms, I guess?
the platforms was basically, so the Python is basically lives on the server side, but some of the tools like Node.js, JavaScript can basically replace the Python on the server side. And he was talking about how do we ship the Python code to basically mobile platforms, Android and iOS, and how do we make Python run in the browser, natively, not in the backend.
Did you touch on WASM at all?
And he touched, so the WASM was, so he was talking about several things, and his presentation was very nice. He was talking about, this sailing, that sailing competition.
Oh, yeah.
And so there wasn't it was the secret thing for the.
He was sort of encouraging people to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
Right. To sort of think about what are we doing to make sure that Python doesn't just sort of stagnate, right? And he used some key events. He's from Australia. He's actually one of the original core maintainers of Django. Now he's got a project called PyB. Is that what
it's a Beware?
Yeah.
Beware, which is really what he's trying to do is be able to take any Python application and then package that for multiple platforms. But so his main goal there is to sort of just challenge the status quo, looking at, so he used the example of a sailing event. Again, I don't know that much about sailing, but in Australia, apparently it was a big thing. They beat
America's Cup.
The America's Cup, there you go. And he talked about the way they went about doing that was by sort of changing the way sailing was done and changing the boat structure. And so he mentioned WASM, he mentioned some of those things, but in mobile, and just really trying to get people to start thinking about, let's make sure we're thinking about the future of Python and not just simply letting it stagnate.
And then that's the biggest thing I got out of it was pushing the boundaries of where we see Python, where Python is right now. Like I talked about earlier, my kids are all in mobile. I would hate to see them 10 years from now not use a great language like Python because they can't do it on mobile, or it's not useful to them on mobile.
Was it mostly an aspirational talk, or was there?
Well, there was one of the things that just stood out to me that one of the things you said flagged in my mind was one of the things he talked about was we need to think of, are we doing open source right? Do we need to rethink the way we're doing open source? Because one of the challenges is funding and making sure that, so one of the things he talked about is you need people who are getting funding to do the deep thinking. And sometimes that can be wasted because in some sense, because you're doing research and trying to figure out, but eventually you get breakthrough events that can sort of move things along. And so that idea of being able to fund the research in ways, he was challenging that idea.
Yeah, and on that note, actually, GitHub today, I don't know if you heard about it, but GitHub today released like a kind of sponsors, developer Patreon account where you can sponsor open source projects. So I think that just shows that there's a direction that open source can move into where it's still open, it's still public, it's still available, but we fund priorities that are important to us. Because you're right, some things you just need a dedicated team who that's your job, that's your deliverable, that's what you're responsible for, and you need money to do that.
Yep.
So he was talking about not being afraid in the open source community to raise money, use money, hire people to do the work, you know, instead of just relying on the contributions of everyone. Like really think about, should we be hiring people to do this?
Like get out your wallets.
Yeah,
That was one of the applications.
Yeah. It's like the example was like when we had this old PyPI, which is Python package index,
Yeah,
where
that's the one used.
we all download the pip install. So that's Python package index. It was written like 15 years ago, and it was very old, and everybody knew that it has to be rewritten. But only work get done in like 6 months after the Mozilla gave a grant to developers, so to put dedicated people to do the work, and it was done like in less than a year. Definitely.
Yeah.
All right, last chance. Any other questions? All right, thank you guys.